Welcome to What Keeps Us Going, the podcast that redefines hope, joy, and resilience for people of color, one story at a time.
So let's get started now. Hi.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Feeling good. I feel a change about in the air and the weather, and it's exciting. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well. It's been a slow day.
Yeah.
But a good day.
Mm-hmm.
But a good day.
Little calm Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you from? Actually, what's your name?
Oh, yeah. My name's María Flores.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Tampa, Florida, and I call Florida home.
Mm-hmm.
All over. I'm at the Harvard Graduate School of Education,
Mm-hmm.
studying leadership, specifically how to be a K through 12 principal.
Why?
In my home, and I would say in a majority of public schools in America, there lacks leadership that looks different and that acts different than the norm, I would say. Even though education is a woman-dominated field, the majority of principals are men, and typically men far removed from the classroom or have never been in the classroom. Also, typically people of higher privileged backgrounds. So I feel if we can at least get people in the door in leadership of
Mm-hmm.
looking a little bit more like the students that are at the school and connect more with the students that are at the school, some magic can happen at these schools. I really think so.
Have you ever experienced that magic happening as a youth?
Yeah. I had a couple teachers back in Catholic school that did look like me and did come from where I came from, and I felt a cultural connection, and I felt they genuinely cared about my well-being, not just me as a student.
Mm-hmm.
They saw me and they saw my emotions and they saw my aspirations and dreams, and they validated that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child, I think you need that. You need to be validated by people who care about you to keep going.
You said something. They validated your emotions and dreams.
Yeah.
What was happening then for you to say your emotions?
Well, when I was a teenager, I would say right around 12, I started to really struggle with inner thoughts, like racing inner thoughts, harmful inner thoughts, suicidal ideations, which felt really strange because my entire childhood, I was known in my neighborhood and my family, if someone asked me how I was doing, I'd say happy, 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 like really fast. That was me. I was the happy girl. So coming on puberty and teenagehood, this like intense change started to happen, and it was hard to navigate. Teachers definitely helped with that, but even more, my parents were amazing at recognizing what was going on with me and having access and knowing what to do to start to get me some help. So kind of I had this at-home life where I was really struggling to want to even go to school, to do these extracurriculars, to be on sports teams, to do all these what felt like performative acts at the time. But at school, I was still this kind of like high-achieving, smart, kind, friendly person who I feel I still am today, but it felt I was competing all the time. There was two parts of me that weren't connecting or didn't feel connected. So that's when my mom started taking me to see a therapist and a doctor, and I started like regular talk therapy. I would go about once or twice a week, and I've done that up until a couple months ago. Yeah, so I've been in therapy since I was 12 years old, kind of fighting through these things and learning all these coping mechanisms and eventually just ways of life that feel healthy and productive for me. Also, medication was a whole other thing, if we want to get into that. I saw a lot of health professionals, a lot, from therapists to nutrition to dietitian to psychologists to psychiatrists, you name it. I was probably being seen from in between age 12 to 18, which is a privilege in itself, right? That I had access and I had care, but still a struggle for a teenage girl just figuring things out and wanting to fit in so bad, but feeling so different sometimes from the other people and my other friends in the form of thoughts and feelings and having those notions of like harm and anxiety and like mood changes very fast. It was chaos, really. It was a dark time in my early teenagehood of my life.
So your parents, you said they recognized it.
Yeah.
How did you engage with your parents?
Oof. I would say my mother helped me the most. She was the one to recognize it. I also felt best talking to my mother about the feelings that I had. I love my father. We have a lot of talks now that I'm older about feelings, but there's something that I didn't want to disappoint him, or I didn't want him to worry about me. If I told him I was thinking of harm, or, you know, I couldn't sleep because I thought of a million things on my mind racing. I didn't want him to know how bad I was suffering. I just wanted to kind of keep a better image of myself. And I did that for a little bit with my mom too. But both of my parents have parents who struggle with mental health, just like disorder, addiction, alcoholism. So they kind of saw signs that something was not right, and they knew that this might be coming, right? That like this might be a hereditary thing. With my family, like mental disorders are pretty common, I would say. I see that honestly a lot in families of color in America, that these things happen to us. Maybe it's genetic, right? Like trauma passed down. Maybe it's just the discrimination and the hardships we face in America that lead to these feelings. But I think my parents knew in the back burner that this may be something that happened to their children. And I'm so grateful for them that they stepped in when they did.
And they step in, was this 8, was this 12? Could you place this in time?
Yeah, I would say right around like 11, 12, even maybe 10 years old, I started to feel all of those feelings I mentioned. I started not wanting to go to swim practice. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't even want to look in the mirror. I didn't want to get out of bed. That's when this started happening. And I would say it persisted up until maybe my later years of high school. And then I started to get a little grasp after finding a therapist I really connected with. I felt I had some like coping mechanisms, and I had a little bit more clarity of my disorders. I was able to get some diagnosis. Unfortunately, my pediatrician, she refused to put me on any medication as a minor. So we waited until I was 18 to start some medications, which looking back, I think maybe if my child was really struggling, to push a little harder on the doctor to see if there was anything that could help, because we've got to a point where there's some kind of chemical imbalance here, right? Like there's as much breathing, journaling, artistic, creative routes to get out those emotions, talk therapy. I still felt off. I still felt uncontrollable in the feelings that I had.
How do you know that that was mental health as opposed to puberty? Because there's so much change that's happening, or even the stress of going from one kind of school to another kind of school, or integrating with another kind of group of people.
Why not both?
Yeah.
I think when I was 10, I did start a new school, and I think I went to a bigger school. So I think that had to do with maybe some of the self-consciousness I was feeling. I felt it was being perceived by so many new people. I was the only new kid at the school that year for 5th grade. And it was like, you know, the new toy, the new doll. That you people are like, oh my God, I want to be friends with you. Of these kids who've gone to school together since kindergarten. And I entered in 5th grade, and it goes into 8th grade. It was a K through 8 school. I think I got really self-conscious on how people were perceiving me. I also do think it was somewhat puberty. Yeah. But I think where my mother saw, you know, she saw the teenage emotions coming out, not knowing how to regulate those. But once we started creeping into, like, I don't want to be here anymore, and I don't think I should exist, that was more of a red flag, that maybe this isn't just puberty. Especially the persistence. Like, I would say it took a good 6 months to a year to really start thinking, oh man, maybe we need to do some therapy, right? And then we're on 2 years, and I'm still, like, not making progress. So I think the persistency also made my parents, or at least my mother, think this was a mental health disorder.
That's perceptive.
Yeah.
That's super perceptive because of all of those changes. At least from where I'm sitting, it may be hard. Even both from the perspective of the parent or you know, a loved one, and your own perspective. Because at least for me, I didn't have the language when it came to mental health. So I might have thought I'm just stressed or tired or whatever it is, and not know what to attribute it to.
Yeah. I think I have to shout out Jeanette and Hector, my parents, because I felt we had such a good relationship that I could talk about things that maybe were a little uncomfortable, whether as a child I thought it might just be stress, and my parents be able to recognize that this wasn't maybe normal, or maybe compare me to my sibling, and, you know, we didn't go through this with this one, so what's happening here, you know? I think I'm the luckiest girl in the world sometimes to have my parents and to be able to have that resource.
What about your relationship, the relationship between you and your parents is so special? How does it work?
How does it work? My parents both had, I would say, abusive households. And this is me making some assumptions, but I think when they decided to get married and have kids, they knew that was not going to happen. I think after having conversations with my parents as I'm older now, they wanted to do right by their children because they felt such a severe impact from the homes that they came from. And they had issues themselves, for sure. When it comes to mental health because of that trauma. So I think they really did the absolute best that they could, even though, you know, they were working a lot and things weren't perfect, and we definitely had fights, and my brother and I would, like, try to kill each other all the time and argue, and nothing was ever perfect. But I think the consistency that they just kept showing up and kept saying, we love you, it's okay, we love you, and we can work it through. I had that relationship where if I have to call someone and I just, like, know they need to pick up, like I'm in something dire, I always think to call them first. And I realize that's not the norm at all. But they intentionally made our home like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I love them.
And just to get a bit of a demographic or background, where's your mom from?
Yeah.
Where's your father from?
My mother, she's from Chicago, Illinois. Her descent is, like, Irish, Polish, like a little French. You can pull up the Ancestry DNA. It's all over the place. And then my father, he grew up in Illinois, Chicago as well, Humboldt Park. I believe he was born in Puerto Rico, moved at a very young age. Yeah. My mom lived in, like, rural kind of farm area outside of Chicago, and then my dad lived in inner city, south side Chicago. And this would be during they're both born in 1960 and 61. So they were growing up in the 70s in Chicago.
What automatically pops out to me, you saying rural and your father being of Puerto Rican descent, I don't know that being adept with handling mental health issues would come from those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I would assumption that maybe living in a rural environment, you might not be exposed or have the language or a culture around talk therapy
Mm-hmm.
or psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists. And even if the culture might exist, I don't know if there are resources there to support it.
Yeah.
And then, as your father being a person of color, I also wonder the same thing as to how that came to be, where he felt ready, comfortable, perceptive enough to be able to see it in his daughter.
This is something I should ask them, really. I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know. I think it goes back to their lived experiences, particularly both of their fathers had severe mental health issues. My maternal grandmother as well, I think she had some issues. And actually, yeah, my paternal, I think all of my grandparents had some kind of disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing from my parents, I also think as I was growing up in like the 90s and early 2000s and 2000s that there was a culture shift around parenting and mental health. I think my mom, as she became a lawyer and she got into those spaces with that access and that knowledge, I think that also helped. Like going to law school and being around really privileged people and being with these like rich South Florida lawyers all the time. I remember her telling me, she would ask them like, what schools are good? Where should we put our kids for this? Where should we do this? So just kind of having access to that whole other world that they maybe didn't come from was really helpful. In my father's work, that wasn't the case. He's in aviation, and so it was more of a working class job, and my mom had more of like a high class job, I guess you could say, or a professional job, even though we're all professionals no matter what field we're in. But there was definitely different access to like cultural and wealth and knowledge in that sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Just what exists.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What exists. I mean, that's something I'm learning every day. So it's awesome that your mother was able to do this and your father was ready, perceptive, and just a pairing of the two.
Yeah, they're awesome. I miss them a lot. Leaving home was hard to go to college, and I had some really hard years in college. Like 2018, 2019 were really dark. I would say like comparable to the puberty years. And I didn't have them. They were like 4.5 hours away. And so navigating all of that as a young woman, like just starting to be really independent was so hard. But they were there when I needed them. I remember, so to give context, 2018, 2019, we lost a lot of people in our family unexpectedly. So my uncle passed away unexpectedly. My grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, and a month later she had passed. My cousin died from breast cancer, and one of my aunts on my dad's side had passed away as well. So there was a lot of grief in our family. And then at the same time, I was in college living with a partner who became abusive. He also, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, by the way, so I feel it's fitting that we did this in October. But that all kind of happened within the span of 9 months, and I just remember calling my mom, crying after I had left my partner. My friends came to the apartment we were living in the middle of the day while he was at work, and got all my shit out of there as fast as we could. I stole the dog, the one I have now, and I remember being in the car after having it's full of all my things, right? And my dog is in my lap, and I called my mom and dad, and I called my mom. I was like, "You need to come up here. You just need to get here. Something happened." And they were there the next day, or that day, I think. They came up to Tallahassee when they were in Tampa. And that was the week of my 21st birthday, so I got to celebrate that with them. But again, like, they are my people. I don't think I would have survived that week without them being there. That was like the hardest week of my life.
What about what I'm thinking about right now is there's this 2018, 2019 time period, and so much grief.
Yeah.
And being away from this foundation of support that you'd had your whole life. But when you want to count the years of mental health, 10, 13 years.
Yeah.
And so during that time period, how did you really persist? What kept you going?
I want to say my education, one. My mother instilled in me, before I was even born, like, still in her uterus, like, you are going to get an education. You're going to become financially independent. You're not going to rely on absolutely anyone for anything. I don't want to leave this world, like, knowing that you couldn't, like, take care of yourself, right? So I think that persistence of, like, I need to finish this degree. I was 2 years in, so dropping out just didn't feel like an option. So I knew that had to persist. I had this wonderful, wonderful job at the Dean of Students at Florida State University running orientation. Because I ran orientation, I knew a lot of services. So I went to the victim advocate, and they had an office where they could give me food, money, even like temporary housing. They talked me through the legal process of what that would look like if I wanted to press charges or do that. They set me up with the group therapy. And then I already had a psychiatrist at the university that I was seeing, but then it was bumped up to twice a week I was with the psychiatrist. Once a week I was in the therapist, and then also in group therapy. So there was like an intense team around me, like just making sure that I wasn't going to fall back into those old ways of like suicidal ideation and just like functioning. And it was helpful, actually. I did get some time off of school and work. I took some time, like I want to say 2 weeks. Victim
That's it?
Yeah, I know.
You said took time off? Like, oh, good. She took, a few months.
No, I knew I couldn't take a whole semester. I knew that was not going to happen. This was February. So we were already deep, it felt like, into the semester. In the middle of getting my degree, I just knew if I stopped, I may not start again. I think that was my greatest fear. If I, took a semester off, that it wasn't going to happen. But I kind of put everything off for 2 weeks. My professors just got an email saying, this student is going through some traumatic events. She'll be back to class, probably by this date. Don't, reach out to us. Don't really bother her. Which was amazing.
Yeah.
Because I just can't even imagine 21-year-old me going up to my professor, begging for an extension, her asking why, and being like, well, I just left my abusive boyfriend, so, that just wouldn't happen. I just wouldn't ask for the extension.
Well, I mean, I can for sure see that, and if today there's this perspective of, had you taken more time off, you might not have gone back. There's a lot that's on my mind right now.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We have time.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But there's a concern, right? From where you're sitting today, I can only imagine that concern being amplified.
Yeah.
21-year-old you, while you're in school, away from everything that's grounding to you.
Yeah. Oh, my turn to talk. As much as I felt so far away from my community, my best friends they were either in Tampa or Orlando, so I was in North Florida, 4.5 hours away by car. So not miles and countries away, or millions of miles, but still far, right? there was a physical disconnect, but I think technology helped a lot, like being able to check in. Also, I had community at FSU. I was training, at the time I left the partner, I was training 44 freshmen and sophomores how to be orientation leaders. We called ourselves a family. We did retreats together. You know, I was with them all the time. We lived together in the dorms for a whole summer. That was my family. And I remember, like, I was TAing a class for them on leadership, and it was like the day I left him, the next day I would TA. And I came in, and I was just like, I told them, I was like, my boyfriend's been abusing me. I have never told anyone up until yesterday. It's been going on for a year. I just left. I'm going to take a break. And, like, the way people showed up to my house with, like, food and flowers and just, like, sending me all kinds of stuff to make sure I was okay, checking on me, like, I know there was some kind of group chat, like, who's going to check on Maria today? Like, who's going to show up for her? Who's going to help her with her dog? Like, who's going to do this? There was a huge community of that. So I had those 44, you know, my employees, my friends. And then the previous year, there was another 44 of them that we also had got close to that when I was an orientation leader. So I had this, like, huge community of, like, 100 plus people at the Dean of Students office.
Yeah.
Knowing what I was going through and just, like, being there for me.
Yeah.
Like, literally a village of people. And I really think that's how I made it through that summer, because there were plenty of attempts to contact me, showing up at where I lived, you know, messaging me from different accounts, different phone numbers. Like, there was definitely times where he persisted, but I felt like I have 100 bodyguards right now. Like, and something about, as a domestic abuse survivor, like, saying it out loud to someone feels like a safety net. It's like, thank God someone else knows now. I think as soon as I said it, I was like, okay, there's no going back now. Like, as soon as I told my mom, I was like, I know that he can't get me back. Because there had been previous attempts where I've tried to leave before, many times, and it just couldn't. And I didn't tell anyone. No one knew what was going on. They would, you know, we're going through a hard time, or, you know, we're fighting right now, but not being specific about what he was doing and things like that. So actually, like, saying it out loud to either my closest friends or even my therapist. I remember, like, one session I was just like, I made a list of, like, all the shit he did to me, and we burned it after, and it was great. It was so healing. I love burning letters of paper. I've done it quite a few times in therapy after, like, traumatic events, of, like, writing a letter to the person and then just burning it. It's been great. So there was a lot of care that went into me during that period, which saved me. I don't know if I would still be here if I didn't have that care, and that, like, persistent care too. You know, like, my therapist and psychiatrist, they were watching me like a hawk. Also because I was on a lot of medication, I started some new stuff to kind of help, like, ease some of the pain and anxiety. But yeah, there was a care team, a big care team.
How did you get to the point that you told your mother? It had been going on for about a year, maybe longer.
Yeah.
But there were moments, right, that you said you were fighting, and you sort of alluded to it.
Yeah.
But it took some time for you to say it. So how did you get the courage to say it?
It was really hard. It was hard because I felt at school, at work, with my family, I'm this very strong, you know, charismatic woman who cares. I care for others. I lead others, right? Like, I feel that I come off extremely confident. I felt like I was this, like, model daughter. And then having to tell my mother, like, not that I messed up, but I'm stuck in something and I don't know how to get out, was so hard. But thankfully, I really just had to say, like, one sentence. I was like, he's been hurting me. That's all I had to say. And I knew that because my mom told me at one point, maybe in the last year, that she had a boyfriend when she was in law school who had also hurt her. Yeah. So she immediately knew what was going on, and she didn't blame me. She didn't, tell me, why didn't you tell me sooner? It was just like, okay, that's what we're dealing with. And I think also there's this idea that this doesn't happen a lot to women, but it does. And a lot of women never admit it, that it happened. A lot of women don't even recognize, if not physical abuse, right? That's pretty easy to identify, but there's also like the coercion, right? Like you're not being physically touched, but they punched the wall, they broke the door, they locked me in somewhere into a room. Like that kind of, I'm not touching you, but you are not safe. That happens too, and we don't necessarily think of that as abuse, but it is, right? Like your body's physically unsafe. Someone is trying to cause harm. So she just knew. She knew what I was going through, and she asked me like a little bit, would you want to do anything? No. What do you want? And I told her I just need support right now, and there's nothing. I didn't want to go through the legal process of doing all of that. It felt like it would just disrupt the healing, and the way the legal system works, everything is so drawn out, right? So I'm like, I don't want to be a year from now finally back to some normalcy and be like, oh, I gotta go to court, or oh, I have to go do this, or I have to refile a restraining order, whatever. So thankfully, after a couple months, like, he realized that he was not going to get me again, and things like calmed down, and I was able to move on a little bit. But
it's a long time.
Yeah.
A couple months.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining.
Yeah.
The move out.
Yeah.
And there's just the work, the conversation with the family, with friends.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't say the real healing. Well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what language to use.
Just be yourself.
Yeah, but months later, finally, there's that pause enough to believe that what you were dealing with is over.
Yeah.
After it's, hey, I'm in this terrible situation. Great, I leave, which physically might feel I'm away. I'm safe.
Right. And my body's safe.
Yes, but that's not the case until months later.
Yeah. Especially, I also had to finish school. Tallahassee's small. Tallahassee's not a big city.
Yeah. Right?
So I had fear for 2 years that I was going to see him somewhere, or that he was going to see me somewhere and come up to me. Like, there's only so many grocery stores. The Central College area was like, everything you had was right there. There's no need to go far. So I lived for 2 years with that. Like, I remember when I turned 21, because he was much older than me, he was about 10 years older than me. I was like so nervous I would see him at a bar, because now that was a new space to navigate. So I lived with that for 2 years until I moved to Jacksonville, and I really felt free then, for like the first time in 2 years.
How was that?
Yeah, amazing. Honestly, I was like, there's no way he knows where I live. He's not going to show up here. Like, he probably doesn't even know I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah, and then I even remember past that couple months, he persisted. His family, because I knew his family very well, they were even like, how would you try couples therapy? We miss you. The kids miss you, like his nieces and nephews. Like, you missed this wedding. Like, there was like that guilt as well. So yeah, that's why it's so hard to leave an abuser. And that's why you see so many people go back, because the persistence of all of the factors, right? Like, in some situations it's more economical, like it's so hard to leave, and you don't have anything, but there are all these other outside factors happening as well that you just have to, ignore and push away. And I didn't have the heart to tell his family, like, exactly what he did, like, physically. I don't think they knew there was abuse. I will give them the benefit of that doubt. I think they just thought we had a bad fight or something happened where we broke up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they knew to the extent. And I was in no position to tell them that their grandson was abusive and harmful to me.
What would you say to your 21-year-old self? Or 20, because you hadn't turned 21.
Yeah, it's literally the week of my 21st birthday. Quite a week, right? Like, leaving your abusive boyfriend, stealing a dog that's technically not yours. That was one thing I was really nervous about. I was like, if he comes back for this dog, I'm fighting for my life, because this dog is mine. Because, I mean, he hurt me, right? He definitely hurt the dog. Like, I saw, he would hurt the dog all the time. So I was like, if not me, the dog is going to be safe. But going back, your question was...
What would you say?
To my younger self.
Yeah.
I wish I could just tell her, like, you're almost 26 now. You're at Harvard. You are in probably the coolest city you've ever lived in. You're meeting amazing people every day. You're still best friends with X, Y, and Z. You still have the dog. Your parents are good. Like, life, if you can just hold on for about 5 more years, like, life is really good. And it is worth staying alive for. And even, like, before this, right, like, life was still great in Jacksonville, too. But I think I would just say, like, just keep going. Just hold on a little bit longer, and things are going to get a lot better for you. And it did, because then I found teaching, and I fell in love with that career and realized I'm meant to serve children. And, like, so many great things have happened since then, where I'm so grateful I didn't give in one night, or I didn't stay or go back. But I think I would just tell myself how successful and how worth it is that I am now, and also how healthy I am now. Like, not just my relationship with men and women have improved, but my relationship with myself. I don't feel that self-hate that I used to feel anymore. It's not there a lot. And, occasionally, maybe if I'm really going through something, grad school has stressed me out a bit, but I think that's another thing that, like, it got a lot better. I feel things are so manageable now. Like, medication's great. I'm no longer actually even going to talk therapy because I don't need it. There's nothing more for me to gain. I feel like I have these skills for life. And 21-year-old Maria would be so shocked by that. She'd be like, we're not seeing Lisa anymore? We're not? I'm like, no, girl, like, we're doing really well. I really wish I could do that and just go back and tell myself. Because in that moment, all I can think of is, like, I shouldn't be here. I messed up. I let this go on too long. I'm never going to get better. This is never going to go away. He's always going to be looming over me. All those thoughts, all those intrusive, like, big assumption thoughts that I had that weren't real, but looking back, but, like, genuine and valid, but it's so hard to see outside of that, right? Like, when you're in that dense fog of, you can't see. So I think just kind of showing my little baby self that, like, things are a lot better in the future. Yeah, just stay here. You're going to be okay.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I love this full circle moment, right? Of, we talked about your profession, but there's this, oh, I tried different things, I fell into teaching, and there's this, oh, there was somebody who was going through it at a young age, and now I'm in this position to see that I'm in this position to invest in the future of these kids.
Yeah, I actually heavily considered, instead of principalship, of being a school psychologist. My social worker at my previous school kept telling me, like, oh, you're gonna go get your social work degree, right? Like, you're gonna become a social worker and come work with me in the office, because she told me out of the whole school, I was the teacher reporting the most about, like, mental health concerns. And, like, effective too. Like, I just knew, it's so plain when you've been through it, seeing a 14-year-old or 15 or 16-year-old going through it. They want to be seen. So many of them want to be seen. Like, they're wearing short sleeves and they have cuts. Like, how can you not say something? They say they're not interested in anything. How is that not a red flag? So my experience in my mental health has 100% helped my students and any student really I came in contact with that school, because I knew what it would look like, especially in kids of color. Sometimes it looks different. Sometimes it's like acts of violence, right? Like there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of harm, and people are acting out and hurting other people. Being able to see that and think, okay, what is really going on here, wasn't a mental bandwidth that a lot of teachers had. Mm-hmm. I think when you're so stuck in it and so tired of seeing the same things, it's hard to step back and say, okay, but why is this child skipping, right? Why is this child getting into fights constantly? What's making them this angry? And then you really start to step back and think about the child holistically. But as teachers, where I was working, we had no bandwidth to do that. We couldn't even make a proper quiz sometimes, right? Like, let alone be aware of our students' social, emotional needs. But I knew how important it was for me that my mom and dad stepped in when they did. So it doesn't matter what adult is doing it, like, I'm going to step in. Because the worst that can happen is maybe they just had a bad day. But more than not, it was a student really contemplating suicide, or really contemplating harming someone else, like killing someone else, or, there were deep issues there. So it's been a tool that I'm going to keep with me forever, and honestly a strength now of, like, I know how to navigate the mental health system. I know how to navigate psychiatry versus psychology. I know the difference. I know what resources are in Florida. I know how to talk to parents about it now. I know how to talk to kids, obviously, but, like, also how to navigate with the parent is different too. So there's so many parents that don't want to see it, don't want to admit it, right? Like, going back to my father, if I was so scared if he was going to be disappointed, right? That's real for some parents, right? They don't want to recognize that their child's depressed. They think their child's just complaining, right? So being able to have that conversation with parents has also been, I think, life-saving, and getting them to see that this isn't, teenage angst or puberty, that there's a mental health issue going on.
There's a lot there. There
is a lot there.
What comes to my mind is this idea of representation.
Yeah.
Right, and so I see somebody who looks like me. It could be gender, it could be sex, it could be ethnicity, whatever. And then there's this other layer of experiences, right? And so I just imagine your students feeling more comfortable to open up, and then being pleasantly surprised by how you're able to connect with them. There's a cool, I'll tell you, but I don't necessarily expect much back, but I'm glad I can tell you. Yeah. And all of a sudden there's this wealth of knowledge and a wealth of resources, a wealth of experiences that you have that allows you to connect with these students in ways that maybe no one else ever has.
Yeah, I agree. I think most of my students had never had that up until that point. And it's really not hard to open the door to students. I remember at one point, my first year teaching, I messed up. Like, I said something wrong or gave wrong directions. And, like, a student roasted me, and I was like, you know what? I get really anxious every time I teach. I get really nervous that I am going to mess up. And it stresses me out sometimes. Like, I stay up making these lessons thinking, like, I want them to be great for these kids. And it's stressful and it's hard. And I remember, like, 5 people wrote in our little, like, anonymous question box, like, I get really anxious too about this, or, like, I'm stressed out about this. And I'm like, this is all it took, was just to be, like, honest that I'm nervous teaching Shakespeare right now. Like, that's all it takes is to just admit it, because also teachers are put on this kind of, they're not human, they're, like, this pedestal of greatness, or just, like, you're here just to teach me, you don't get nervous, you don't get stressed, like, you're the teacher, right? But just humanizing each other has worked well in my classroom and created community, and honestly improved academics too. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not some, like, super teacher with all these, like, amazing frameworks for teaching. I just created a pretty safe environment where kids could be open and not face consequences about their feelings, or not feel judged. Yeah.
It's a lot easier to apply a framework to those who are willing to listen and have that framework be applied to them.
I agree. I definitely did not reach every child or connect with every child. I think about kids a lot when I'm, in bed at night still, sometimes with anxious thoughts. I'm like, oh, I hope that one kid is okay. And like, I wonder what I could have done to reach them, but that's not productive for me necessarily, but also like what could have this system done for them as well? Because one-on-one adult, trying to make a connection wasn't working, or maybe it just wasn't working with me, right? But I still think about them and how maybe if a different adult or someone earlier, maybe in middle school, could have like connected with them and reached out to them, maybe they wouldn't be in jail. Maybe they wouldn't be in XYZ situation because they had some kind of mentor or someone to connect to.
You talk about this system.
Yes.
I want to bring it back to this program you're in, to be a principal. You are now going to be establishing systems.
Yeah.
And so there's this day-to-day of what it means to be a principal, and there's this day-to-day of what it means to be Principal Flores.
Yeah.
And what you bring, the zhuzh you bring to the role, the skills that you look for in the people that you hire. What matters to you is this mental health component, being able to connect with the students, being able to recognize student needs beyond academic needs.
I believe I wrote about this in my Harvard essay, but something I want to bring back into schools, or into schools if they've never had it, is just a culture of love and care about the student. I want the school that I run, I want to have love for my staff. I want to have love for my teachers, my custodians, my lunch people, the delivery person. Like, I need it to be a community of love. If there's like any children in the building, I think that we have taken love and compassion out of schools. And it's been detrimental to our students, especially our students of color, who may need that little extra love just a tiny bit more. Or people, where I work is pretty trauma heavy, like just having a little bit more love where school can feel like, I'm safe here, someone in this building loves me, I know I can go to at least one person in this building. So as I'm going to, go into schools next school year and hopefully either run a school as an assistant or principal, I really want to focus on school culture and how that would look like in a big school. Like, it might take years. A lot of times school culture does take years to build, but I am adamant at making any school that I go into and work in a culture of love and caring.
You're talking about love and caring, you're smiling. I'm wondering, how do you express joy?
Probably loving myself, and that looks like a lot of different ways, but giving myself what I need kind of just like exuberates joy outwardly for me. So whether that's taking time to be physically active and making nutritious choices, like, that's joy to me because the output is joy. Creating community and friends and social outings, like, that's joy for me. Art, like creating art, even if it's horrible and it's nothing anyone's ever going to see, or I journal like a lot, that creates joy for me. Just doing these things that I know is going to sustain this for the long run is kind of my key to happiness and key to life, is like knowing those little things that give you joy and being persistent and consistent about them, no matter what's going on at work or school or in your relationships, like making sure that you keep up with those little things that give you joy.
All right, really appreciate that. So I have a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
One that comes to my mind is, what's something, somebody that always makes you laugh?
My best friend Vanessa. Yeah. Every time we're together, we are just giggling. laughing. Sometimes we say the same things at the same time. It's when you know you've been friends too long. Yeah, definitely Vanessa, the best.
What's something that you've carried with you since childhood?
Carried with me. Kind of this, like, I've always had this little fire. It's like, keep working harder, keep going, keep doing it. Sometimes I can't hear it or I can't feel it when I'm in the really dark places that I'm in, but I always can come back to it at some point. I can find it again and I can kind of relight that fire, like that drivenness that I have. I don't think I'm ever gonna it's never gonna leave me at this point. I feel I'm ambitious and driven, and that's like my core being.
Who's one of your favorite teachers?
Dr. Sylvia. She taught me British, so I took dual enrollment, so like college courses is my junior year, and she taught British literature, and I fell in love with this woman. She's from New England, you know, I think maybe in her 60s when I encountered her. She retired actually the year after I graduated. She, for once in private school, just kind of gave it to me as it is and was like blatantly honest with my academics, with herself, her presence. She was just so unapologetic. So I ended up taking 4 courses with her. So I took British literature, I took advanced placement language, I took advanced placement literature, and one more class that's escaping my head. And just the way that she pushed me to be the absolute best I could with my writing and in my academics, I had never had that experience. Like, she knew what exactly to say to not push me down, but to make me want to be better. Yeah, I definitely learned my best writing skills from her.
We'll end there because that was beautiful. Shout out to all the great teachers in the world.
Shout out to all the good teachers. We love them.
Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for the space. This felt healing in itself. I haven't talked about it, like I said, in a long time, so, or at least here.
You just listened to What Keeps Us Going with me, your host, King. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and a review at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Hope to see you around.